All right, now let's get started by diving into the frameworks a little deeper. So I have a question for all of you. What is your process of improving developer experience for your frameworks?
Especially how we've just seen how important that is, right? So maybe Fred, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. We're still new, so we're still figuring out what a great Astro developer experience looks like. So a lot of that is trying new things and having a really strong connection to our community. I think our Discord is probably one of the things I'm most proud of. About 5,000 people strong now, and we're super active on there. So we do weekly calls, a lot of active engagement. We have a bunch of core maintainers who've stepped up. Our doc site is getting a ton of love from the community. And all of that is really iterative and really open communication with the community. So I'd say listening to community. We do our RFC calls in the open so we can get feedback before we ship the feature. All little things like that are hugely important, even if they're a bit more work. I definitely wouldn't trade it.
Nice. Yeah, I guess iteration really is the keyword there, right? Coming back to things and then continuously improving. Tan, can you give us some insights on how this works at Swell?
Oh, sure. I think it's basically I think Fred has summed up most of the all the things that I can think of, right? Which is like feedbacks, and I think there's a lot of sources that you can get feedbacks from. For example, like the GitHub issues, or maybe people complaining on Twitter. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
I think
definitely.
like all of them, right? And I guess it's it's really not easy because there's so much volume of all this information and how you process it. And I believe like different people have different opinions about stuff. And also, so I really need to point out also there's a lot of maintenance judgment to figure out like what people actually wants and why do they like what is the reason behind all these complaints. Is this because sometimes when people raise out some things, they say, why can't I do this and why can't I do that? And there's a lot of times there's a lot of reasons behind and things that we want to prevent or ways or directions that we want to nudge people to. And there's a lot of things, thought process that's put into just to not just like give them what people want, but also like try to bring people to the right direction on what what we think they should want, right? Something like how Apple designed things where, sometimes not just like just give people what they want. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a
I'll
good
say
point.
I just would love to add on because I think Svelte gets a lot of credit. We borrow the best from everyone. So we've also been lucky enough to see what the Svelte community loves about their syntax and what Vue and React. And we just are in a very lucky position to have learned from all of the stuff that the Svelte team, for the last many years has been exploring and learning. We're lucky to kind of stand on their shoulders. And I think SvelteKit is in a similar place in Astro is where we get to learn from, Next and Next and that last kind of wave of frameworks. I think they're coming up on 7-8 years old now. They're a lot of learnings that we're able to borrow from them that I know SvelteKit is also borrow. And then we borrow from each other. So there's a lot of learning from other frameworks, what they've tried and how those experiments have gone versus everyone reinventing the wheel. That's something I really like about this group of people we get to learn from.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all about learning from each other, right? So Alex, on a similar note, how do you feel with the rise of all these new shiny frameworks? How has the DX landscape changed over time?
It's super cool because I think we are getting very competitive on the features the framework provide in the different platforms because, as you know, front-end in the past, it was like client side, but now we have server side, we have static sites, we have like even mobile things over there. And of course, as we have developers, we want to have like our tools work for as much places as possible. And I think at the end, you can summarize it as making it easy for us. So for example, I know that the example I gave in my talk was a bit extreme. Like, for example, compare how it is creating a website with jQuery or how it is with Astro. I mean, the developer experience is in a different scale. But that doesn't mean that jQuery is worse. It just means to create the same thing in jQuery will take much more time than doing it on Astro, and probably will be not as easy as to optimize as what you have by default in Astro, for example, or with Svelte. But what I would say is that now that you all know a tool, which is the magic meter, I think it's very, you have to be very honest on, like Tan said, you have to be very honest on listening to the frustrations of your community. If you listen to the frustrations, you should know you can make it better. You can shorten the steps, you can make them easier, you can make them in a more attractive way, and basically get into the user's goal as easy as possible. But in general, about the frameworks, maybe I can talk more about the Vue because I'm a Vue user. So I can see in the Next framework especially, and I can see the same, for example, in SvelteKit compared to Svelte. These meta frameworks, they take what the framework does already, which is actually quite amazing by default, and connects all the dots together so you can you don't need to do that much work to achieve the same thing. For example, in the case of Nux 3, it's a very small thing, but a lot of people use it. So in Nux 3, there is this concept of auto imports. So actually, there are many utilities or components that you don't need to import to write that import line. Of course, you can agree or disagree if that's very implicit or too magic, but you are saving steps to achieve the same thing. And a lot of people is loving it.
Is there such thing as too magic? I love it.
Yeah. What did Fred say? Automatical? Oh yeah, automagical.
Yeah.
That's a good one. All right. Let's see. This one's for Fred. So you've already mentioned a couple of selling points of Astro. Is there anything in addition to performance, like bringing your own framework, etc., that you'd like to mention?
Those are the big ones. I'd say as we start to grow, we're starting to hit more on just the ease of use story. So I was able to kind of touch on that, but in a demo, everything's so new. I just say that it's something we really care about is not just, is it fast, which should be something you don't have to think about. So it should almost like kind of fade into the background and be auto magical. But what is the experience? What is the developer experience? What is it like to use it? And we really optimize for simplicity in a way that I think other frameworks don't. Not because they're wrong, but just because they're optimizing for the power of complexity, where I think we're optimizing for the power of simplicity. So that idea of there's not a lot of functions to juggle, your code should feel really explicit, even compared to some of the kind of static site builders that we see ourselves being an alternative to. There's not this like magic data cascade where if you put a file here, it's available in this variable, but the connection's really not very easily documented. Stuff like that are just values that we try and bring into the design of the language. So nice. We're very lucky to have a team with a lot of experience in the space. And we've been trying to basically avoid all the mistakes that we've either not liked in our own experience that we've learned from our users, and just be something that you can pick up. And no matter what your background, even if it's just HTML or it's Svelte or it's React or Vue, it should feel really familiar really quickly. And then you should be able to learn as you go, versus having to, stop, learn the thing for an hour, and then start, the hello world getting started should be very easy.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. The user experience on the developer side should be smooth as butter.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it speaks to that type of team that we're trying to reach. If you're building something with content, you maybe don't have a team of dedicated engineers who's building an application. Maybe you're just trying to get some content to some users. So it's all about the right use case. It's a choice that we make, but I think it's one that really makes sense for the type of site we're building.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What you just mentioned about things being very intuitive or that they should feel easy, I guess, to get started. Do you have any words of advice for people who are really just starting out, maybe besides the usual to-do app that that everybody starts with?
Yeah, I mean, in Astro, we have a couple of templates that you can start with. I mean, this is totally personal, but I'm a big fan of building something that just feels fun, and it doesn't have to make sense. I wish I could show you, but I was gonna, if I had time, build a like Owen Wilson soundboard, because there's this great Owen Wilson generator, like API of all the times he says "wow" in his movies. Like, wow, that's dumb and fun, and I really like I don't know. That's totally personal, but I really like just if it feels fun and dumb, then I think you're going in the right direction, and you can still learn a ton over engineering something stupid like that.
That's like the best way to like build things. It's just like experimenting with things that you might think are pretty nifty or just hilarious. Like, wow.
Yeah, it's been a big, I think, a thing that we were really excited because Astro kind of comes off of a project called Snowpack, if anyone saw those, which really Veet is now essentially carrying that torch. So Veet is kind of a similar, like, if you're going to learn in like a coding boot camp or a tutorial, like how to do web development, when I started, it was like, great, here's your HTML, good luck, have fun. And now it's, okay, well, here's Webpack, here's how Webpack works, here's NPM install, here's how this works. I think we've not realized how much we've added to the complexity of just getting started that gets in your way. Yeah. So Astro really, I don't know if we're there yet. It's still early. It's hard to work back from that. But what we're trying to be is, run Astro and then it's just HTML. Good luck, have fun. And then the concepts you do need, you can add on as you go. That's something I really miss from PHP days, and I think there's something real there that we have missed and don't really realize how much we've missed it.
Yeah, being simple and like kind of the simplicity of it, and we kind of miss the. I remember my boot camp days. I was just like, let's mess around with this stuff. I don't even know what this means. Let's do this.
Right. I mean, Create React App isn't really as strongly recommended as it was when we started this project. But like that idea of, there's a lot of complexity that is needed to build a site today. So something like Create React App is like, let's just go and hide it. Let's take these 1,000 plus packages and dependencies and let's just hide it. And hopefully the user never has to see it. And that can work. But then the second something goes wrong, they have no ability to debug that. What's this dependency? I've never seen this before. It's hiding away complexity versus just trying to actually remove it. And obviously, we have our auto magical things. There's complexity inside of Astro, but we try and, for the most part, make that something the user will never have to go and debug. As much as possible, it's a part of the build. It's not a part of the foundation you're building on top of.
It's funny that you mentioned that, Fred, because something I heard, and it stuck a lot in my head, is that making something easy is complex. Yes. So I know pretty well that when you want to provide the best developer experience or make something as simple as possible to a developer, it can be super complex from the inside. I always use a lot with Josephine this metaphor of the kitchen and the restaurant, right? So to make the best dish and in an easy way in the restaurant, it could take a lot of work in the kitchen. And yeah, I can get the feeling that you might have when, when providing cool new features with best DX. But actually, I'm really happy that you all are making a great effort on that in the frameworks.
Yeah, we're trying. And again, we get to learn a lot. Like Svelte, I think, actually was earlier to the, like, what if it was just HTML? And then we add back the logic, like the loops and the conditionals. So we don't go as far as them, but there's totally a spirit there that I think they, Rich Harris and Tan, that whole team really, I think, kind of led the way on that we're borrowing from.
Yeah, actually, Garrett raised this question speaking of magic, in the chat, asking basically if there is such thing as, too much magic, and what your thoughts are on that. Can too much magic make fixing a problem maybe more difficult?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially based on what I just said, like that's the risk of anything that's hidden from the user. We try to address that by simplifying what you're eventually building. So instead of one big application that, when something goes wrong, you have to dive into it. You can think of your site as these smaller islands. So smaller meaning less to debug, easier to dig into it, a little bit more contained. The other cool thing that we do, especially in development, is that we ship all of your code unbundled, and using the file names, the source maps, the actual files that you're shipping to the user are the files that you're coding. So I shouldn't say to the user because this is only development, but the idea of when you do need to debug something, unlike Webpack where it's one big bundle, we're able to, thanks to Veet, as our underlying build tool, we're allowed to ship a lot of unbundled code. So you're actually seeing the code run that you wrote in that sort of file by file basis. Complexity, it's something that we still are always really attuned to, but we try and do steps and do different things to help mitigate that. So if something does go wrong, it drops you immediately into your code so you can find out what's wrong in your code. And we can just be the thing that kind of presents that to you as best as possible.
Yeah, that's really interesting. How does that work for Svelte, for example? What's your thought, Lehao?
I don't know about whether it's like too much magic kind of thing, but I do get this thing where if something does goes wrong with, like, say, the code that's generated by Svelte, then I guess because we are compiler based, right? So meaning if the code that we generated is wrong or is buggy, then it's really very frustrating to the users because there's no way that they can change it and they can modify it, even if they figure out like which line is wrong, but they have to work backwards on which line, where in the source code that's actually generate that code, right? Because it's not what you write, it's the compiler that writes it for you. And I yeah, but yeah, so that's like the bane of like the compiler based frameworks, where basically things are generated, and to understand how it generates, people have to figure out like how compiler works, and there's a lot of concepts behind it, right? And that makes it difficult, right? And I do want to point out, like just now I was thinking about when you guys talk about like different complexity, and I somehow this phrase comes to me, where basically there's this thing about, in physics there's like conservation of energy, and in development there's like conservation of complexity. So it's whether like the complexity lies in the user, or it's just like in like insight, and there's basically still a conservation of the complexity is still there, it's just like hidden away. And it just, yeah, if the more we the easier that we give it to user, which means that the more complex it is under the hood. And yeah.
Yeah, that's true. That's a really good point. Thank you.
And I can give Remix a really cool call out here, because I think as builders we get to choose what we build and what we scope. And I think Remix, especially, they're trying to launch, I don't want to misquote any history here, but like Chance, HMR, I think, was something that you guys rightfully or kind of smartfully didn't tackle out of the gate. For us, we wanted to ship that. It's been the bane of our existence. There's a bug in HMR that's a worse experience than if we just hadn't shipped it. So
isn't there always a bug in HMR?
If it's working, yeah, sometimes. I think that there's a choice of scope that we all get control over that is easy to do too much, and then you have to pay the cost of that. That other type of complexity.
Totally. And just to piggyback off that a bit, I think so. The HMR thing is interesting because it raises a point for us where you've got this sort of not a fight necessarily, but like if you have to choose what to focus on. You have to choose to focus on the developer experience or the end user experience. And it's not that HMR is not important, or we don't think that HMR is going to be eventually added to Remix, or that we don't want to invest the time in it. It's that as an early stage startup and an early stage, like a new framework, we've got X amount of resources, and we've chosen to allocate a lot of those towards things that benefit the end user experience. And, we do think that the developer experience is important, but, I think it does add to that matrix of, when you talk about like, I think the question was more about too much magic. But I think that all of this goes into sort of like a matrix of decision making when it comes to building a framework, right? Like you've got all of these different things that you need to weigh, all of these different trade-offs. And that's a really big part of our thought process when we're thinking about any of these trade-offs. But as far as the magic in Remix specifically, I think Tam makes a really good point about Svelte. And like when you bring in a lot of compiler, quote unquote, magic, when the compiler is doing a lot of the work for you, one of the pro of that is that the compiler can really optimize your code, right? Like that's what Svelte's really good at. It's really good at, it gives you an extremely small bundle, extremely well optimized code. And it's able to do that because the compiler does a lot of that transformation for you, and you don't have to think about it. On the flip side, you now have to sort of know how compilers work. You have to at least understand some of the things that the Svelte compiler is doing for you, because it's not just JavaScript anymore. It's a new sort of idea about what a component should look like. And yes, there's some JavaScript in there, but it's not like the scopes don't work the same way, right? So you have to understand that to a degree. So that adds to the learning curve a bit. And I think how Remix has approached the whole idea of magic, like in general, I think we take a more hands-off approach because we're built on React, and React in general, the only real magic in React in my mind is JSX. Everything else is kind of quote unquote just JavaScript. Hashtag won't talk about use effect. But anyway, yeah, I think we try to be less magic, but we also provide different levels of abstraction. And so to me, anytime I've worked on any open source library, whether it's React Router, Reach UI, or now Remix, like it's, to me, abstractions are sort of a higher, they're hierarchical, where like you can drop down to a lower level abstraction to build something really, really powerful, but kind of complex, but you can add different layers onto that. At the end of the day, Remix exposes all of that to you. So you can drop down to the lowest level API if you really want to build your own server. You can even build your own adapter for whatever hosting platform you want to ship to if you don't like any of our adapters. Like we expose all of those APIs to let you do that. But we also don't force you to do that. We've got higher level APIs that you can build on top of and drop down when you need it. So that's how I like to think about magic in Remix, is if you want more magic or if you want a higher level abstraction, we've got a couple of those for you. If you don't want that, or if you want to drop out of that, it's pretty straightforward to do that.
I like a lot, Chance, that you mentioned the levels of abstraction, and I like the higher or lower level APIs, because talking from our Storyblok SDK's experience, it's true that maybe something can be too magical, but at the end, we're humans, we love magic. I mean, I like a lot to think about human interactions, you know, how we work. We love magic, but we don't like that we don't have control over things. So for example, this problem of something being too magical, we also solve it by creating different levels of APIs. So in the highest level API, you have this use Storyblok function composable that just with one line do everything. And that covers like 90% of the cases where our users need to do that, right? But there might be some like 10% of the users that they need to do something different, or they just want to do something in a more controlled way. And we provide like lower level APIs that they can do it with more steps, but of course they have more control over that. I think this can translate also to modern frameworks in a way of the, let's say, the zero configuration. So for example, I didn't try Astro Remix, but I'm pretty sure that getting started, it would be very easy and you don't have to configure many things. Most of things are configured for you. But what if you need HTTPS in localhost? Or what if you need to connect it through a proxy? You should give like some kind of options API where you can configure these kind of things, right? So for me, there is no too much magic as long as it's covered by lower level APIs that gives you more control. That would be my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And the only caveat I would add to that is at the end of the day, frameworks are going to have conventions and opinions, and they're not going to work for 100% of use cases. And that's the nature of choosing a framework. So, I mean, we all like to, or maybe we don't all. I really like that Fred in his slides outlined like where Astro really shines versus where maybe Astro is not the best choice, right? Like, I think we all should be very cognizant of what we're good at, like what problems we're good at solving, and not try to shoehorn ourselves into every single problem that exists for everyone. And you as a developer building a product need to choose whether your philosophy or whether your approach is going to align with the philosophy of the framework that you choose, and, you know, not try to also ask the framework authors to build in 900,000 configuration options, because that's, you know, a whole other thing that we'd have to talk about for 2 hours. But
yeah, actually, you mentioned your philosophies that that Remix is built upon. That already sounds like a super solid foundation. What else would you say are the main strengths of Remix?
So what I love, one thing I love about Remix is that if you ask everyone on our team this question, you're going to get a different answer. It's because I think we do a lot of things that other frameworks, at least in the React space, have. It's not that they can't do them. It's just that the APIs for doing them are often not, they don't push you to do things in a certain way. I know that sounds very vague, but an example being like nested routing, for example. Nested routing, I believe Ember had nested routing. Like a lot of other frameworks of your built platforms on top of nested routing, but we sort of forgot about the power of nested routing until Remix came along. And at least in the React space, in the JavaScript space, there may be other JavaScript frameworks that did. I don't know all the frameworks, but I know a lot of the popular React frameworks did not support nested routing. But the power of nested routing is that you can concurrently make requests on the server across multiple levels of routes and not create that network waterfall that you ordinarily would get if you're fetching, say, in the component level, which is what a lot of folks are doing. And if you don't have nested routing, but you want to fetch on the server, you're going to have to recreate a lot of those requests across all of the routes in a specific route hierarchy, which is just kind of annoying. You end up with lots of code duplication, and again, a lot of people are going to do that sequentially rather than concurrently. So we just handle that for you, the concurrency of that out of the box, which is quite nice. So that's probably my favorite feature, is nested routing. But if you, like I said, if you ask anybody on the team, you're going to get a different answer. We've got more new APIs coming up that work really well with React Suspense that I'm pretty excited about. React Strength is having Kent see Dodds in your corner, is what somebody says in the chat.
Oh my God.
Yeah, he does not stop talking about Remix. So yeah, he's a great cheerleader. I appreciate having Kent on the team.
Yeah, he's a pretty great DevRel. That's pretty cool though, the nested routing thing. It reminds me like of how I was doing like React Router DOM stuff, and I was just like, how do I even get from this main page to this nested page? I'm gonna do this, and then it's just a mess. It's spaghetti.
Yeah. The another really cool thing about, sorry, if you ask me what's cool about Remix or what I like about Remix, it'll take me 2 hours, but I really love forms. Yeah. I love that we've re-exposed forms to people, because especially in React, or in JavaScript frameworks in general, I guess, it's like forms are kind of annoying because we have to communicate between the server and the client. If you want to actually build a traditional form, like with just HTML, right? And the server's over here and the client's over there. Even if your server's Node and at least it's written in JavaScript, it's still probably in a different place. But we've managed to pull in this API that co-locates all of that logic together, I think, quite nicely. So like I said, like in my talk, I talked about building APIs that encourage folks to do things the best way, or the path of least resistance. Will force people, or at least encourage people, to do the right thing, I think. And I think using forms the way they were intended to be used is nice for a few reasons. It's nice just because the HTML spec already gives you so much power in forms, in making requests right there in your HTML. It's very powerful. But it's also really nice because you don't have to wait for JavaScript to load to use a form. You can just submit a form. Like if React hasn't loaded, you haven't hydrated, but the HTML is already there, I can still submit a form. It's still going to post to whatever endpoint and make that request. And yes, the page will reload because we haven't loaded all of React Router yet, but that's fine because interactivity time has gone way down, and the perceived performance of that React application is much better. So I think it's nice when you can just use the platform and let the platform do what it does, and it still works.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. That was oh my God, forms. Forms were so hard in the beginning. when I started coding, forms were just like, I don't get post what? But yeah, it's great that Remix just helps you out over there. And it's like so nifty. I'm like playing around with the Remix app right now, like to do myself. So it's fun stuff.
Yeah, nice. We've talked a lot about like all the shiny things and the strengths of the different frameworks, but we're also kind of wondering what are things that you might still be improving or would say that you're struggling with. This kind of goes out to all of you, but maybe Lihao, you want to start?
Okay, sure. Actually, to be honest, I wasn't really very much involved in like the Svelte maintainer team. I mean, how should I put this? So yeah, I mean like Svelte isn't my full-time, so I do have like full-time job, and like wasn't really much involved, so I don't think I'm not sure I can like fully answer this question. I guess like there's a lot of things that definitely that we can improve on. Personally, I can only think of a few things that it's felt that I feel there's a lot of rooms for improvement. For example, like the slots API in Svelte. Basically, what slot is that it's very much like when you use React, you can have like children or something that you can put within a component, right? And so in Svelte, we have that called a slot. And right now, what slot can do is quite limited. There's like you can't really conditionally like rendering a slot. There's a lot of things that you can't really do with it, and I just feel like, yeah, I'm not really sure I explained this well. Probably it's because like right now it's a bit late for my time. But anywho, I think that if you're asking me like what are things that I feel like we can improve on in Svelte, I think like slot API will be one of the things that yeah, we should really improve on. Yeah.
Nice.
Hopefully that
Yeah,
answers your question. Yeah.
No, absolutely. Yeah. It's funny because we are speaking from all the different time zones. So yeah, this is really, yeah, special experience here. Chance, do you maybe want to answer that as well? Like, what are things that you're struggling with currently or still improving, working on?
Oh, loads of things. Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff to be done in Remix, and there are a lot that are immediately prioritized. There's a lot in the backlog that's sort of secondary, but yeah, we've got a lot of work to do, and we know that, and yeah, I think we have a good, solid, stable framework. And I don't want to undersell that. I think I know it's production ready because people are shipping production apps with it at amazing speed, which is pretty incredible. But yeah, as far as improvements go, I think partial hydration is going to come to Remix at some point. All of that stuff that Fred talked about with partial hydration, I think that's one of the coolest things about Astro. And it's a very hard problem to solve. But like, if we could solve it, honestly, I think if the React team could solve it, that'd be amazing, and we wouldn't have to worry about it. But and who knows, they might. But I think it's going to come to Remix eventually, if not in the form of a React app. Eventually, Remix will also support other frameworks too. So I think that opportunity is really cool. We have we just hired a few months ago a guy who he was big in the Vue ecosystem. I don't think he ever actually wrote any React code before he joined our team. And within like a week, he had already written up a proof of concept for React Router in Vue that would allow us to support Vue in Remix. And I don't want to tell everyone this is coming next week or anything, but it's something we're very cognizant of. And I think eventually we'll be multi-framework, which will be pretty great. A lot of the shiny, flashy DX things, I think will need to be improved to a degree. Hot module reloading is one of those things. Eventually we'll support that. Fancy flashy things in the CLI could probably be tweaked here and there. But like I said, those are the kinds of DX challenges that slightly lower priority for us. So we'll get there eventually. What else? Oh, styling. I think we could improve on supporting different, I guess, preferences in styling that require compiler support. So something I've been working on for the past few months actually is CSS module support, which is a little more complicated than you might expect, especially when nested routing comes into play, because you have to think about where styles are imported in relation to the route hierarchy. So I've had to dig into the compiler to get that support. Pretty much any other styling preference you can support as long as you don't have to directly dig into the compiler. But we could certainly improve a lot of the processing behind that. But yeah, there's lots of stuff.
Thanks for sharing. Definitely. Fred, do you want to quickly have a go at this question as well? Or
Yeah, definitely. Cool. I was just thinking as Dan was talking about Svelte, Rich Harris also, I think like about a month ago, did a talk on basically he just read a Reddit thread just for like 30 minutes. He was just like going through the comments, like, what are people upset about with Svelte, and answering them all. I wish I remember the name of it. Do you?
That was during Svelte Summit, I think. The
Yes.
spring version is on YouTube. Yeah, we'll.
Yes.
And then I think you flipped it halfway through. It's like, all right, here's what you do that I hate. Like you just totally started dumping on. Yeah, obviously, really good feedback there.
Rich is hilarious. I love that he'll open up a talk with like, I hate React, and then just everything from there is like very cordial, and he'll like breaks it down and gets into the nuance. But he always starts with like a real sassy opinion about whatever he's talking about, which I just find it.
A Rich Harris web components breakdown is just like the most like hard to read. It's so well argumented, like whatever the word is. Yeah, Astro. We are coming up on our V1 release, so we're just so heads down on getting that ready. I think we have the feature set that we're happy with. We're just all about polish right now. So you know, user experience, developer experience, all that, just really ironing out the last few details. There's never done with polish, but we're really excited about seeing these APIs in users' hands, getting that feedback, and making the last final tweaks before we ship. I got to show off that Astro add command, which I think is a really fun take, partially inspired by Nuxt. But that idea of being able to add integrations that enhance your app without you having to hook things up yourself using code. So Astro add Tailwind, enabling Tailwind, stuff like that, being pretty hands-off for the developer. Again, just trying to make it really easy to do these things. Without falling into the same traps that like Gatsby or others kind of fell down, where that complexity bleeds into your app. So there's a lot of design considerations there that we're being really careful with. But yeah, we're just, we made a lot of big bets in our V0, and we're now just trying to deliver on those in our V1. So Chance mentioned styling. We're definitely doing our own styling work, and really optimizing the thing that gets sent. I think it's the kind of, when you talk about performance as a main thing, you want to make sure you're delivering on that. So there's just a lot of tweaking and little changes now that the foundation's in place that we're really excited to get done and wrapped up and in front of people. So again, our Discord is where a lot of that activity is happening now. We did the bite off more than you can chew approach. So the last couple of months have been making all these great features work together. So there's a ton to get involved with, which we just see a ton of excitement with just different people jumping into different parts of that story.
Oh, it sounds amazing. And I mean, as Alex mentioned, you can't stress good DX enough, right? So that's a really, really good point. Absolutely.
Very exciting. All right. I guess we have one more question for y'all. Going with like all of the things that you're like looking forward to, how does it all tie into your vision of the future of web development? And it's like, yeah, a question for everybody.
Alex, do you want to maybe? Oh, sorry.
Oh no,
I was gonna pass the ball because nobody knew where to go.
Feel free to call me out. I didn't mean to.
No. Go ahead.
No, I think I mentioned this earlier, so I just wanted to hit on that again. We're all very lucky. I think that we get to, SvelteKit Remix, Astro. We're all coming up with like edge rendering, and having seen what the last generation has worked on, I think we get to design for some really cool technologies. So edge rendering, I think, is the one that seems the most talked about. This idea of running more of your application in servers close to your users versus in a single data center, or all the work of distributing and having to think about that as an engineering task versus a platform like Deno or Cloudflare, where they'll do that work to distribute it globally for you, is really exciting. And it's exciting to see, I think, all of us having different takes on what that could look like when you build for that world. H3 is another one that I feel like we don't talk about enough, but it's this, HTTP 3, the kind of third version of that protocol, is a pretty huge change from, especially if you go back to V1, that idea that your browser, like going way back to HTTP 1, like you could only load, I think, like 6 resources in parallel. So the idea of like 6 images is the max you could load, or 6 style sheets or scripts. We've come a long way from them, where now H3 is not just loading things in parallel, but actually sharing the same stream. If one resource, drops a packet, the others are going to keep loading. It's non-blocking. There's some really cool stuff that unlocks, where breaking down your application and how you ship it to the user in a way that's more cacheable really opens up some cool stories around how that user experience and how that user experiences your performance as you move through the site, versus the classic problem of, well, I bundled my whole site into one JS bundle for performance, but now the user hits and they have to load my entire site even though they're just on one of 100 pages. So there's just really cool stuff going on the web right now that we get to design for instead of having to react to. Vite is another thing that we get to build on top of, versus seeing how Next.js is having to move from Webpack to something else, that's a gargantuan lift when you've gone 8 years building on top of a single technology that now is seeming to be kind of past its prime, and there seem to be more exciting roles where Vite and ES Build are all kind of making that story much, much better. So we've been on top of Vite and ES Build since the start. It's been a really nice thing that we just don't have to worry about.
I guess that would now be the time to pass on the ball.
Yeah, somebody's going to say something, because otherwise we're just going to sit here.
Lee, how do you want to?
Yeah, okay, sure. Web3, I don't know, decentralized web. I don't know, just kidding. I feel like I feel like there's a lot of things that Fred has mentioned, and I totally agree. There's so much technology. There's so much, like, I'm not really sure whether we can use the word new, but there's a lot of modern technologies that was so much different back then. Maybe I'm not too old, but I guess, like, for some of like us, like web developers, maybe when we started out building web applications, all the technology choices that we have is so much different than what we have right now. And I feel like there's so much things for, like, newcomers to learn, right? Especially in boot camps, like right now, like there's so many concepts, like if what do I need to do if, like, I need to enable, like, edge developing on the edge, and like if, like, how like HTTP3 sounds cool, but how should I use it? Like, if I want to pre-render my sites on server side, like, so many things to learn about, so many concepts, so many things to set up. And I guess, like, that's the beauty of, like, the, like, meta frameworks like SvelteKit or Astro and Remix, which is to basically to help newcomers. And I believe, like, this is the right direction that we're going, where basically we make it much simpler and, like, explain it to only, like, important concepts, and, like, we, like, automatically do a lot of stuff for them, like, so that, if you want to do, like, enable history, maybe it's already enabled by default and you don't really have to do much about it, but you still have all the power that you can if you want to configure things for yourselves. And I believe that's the future of, like, web development. Yeah.
So I will continue from my side. What I'm most excited about, especially, is all these new Lean.js frameworks that are coming up. Of course, Astro including in them. I didn't try it, but I had to say I love the philosophy, Fred. I have to be honest. But I also put in that line, like, 11T. I think Solid is also in that line. What else? All these frameworks that they play very well in the Jamstack, So in Storyblok, most of our users, they build content-based websites, and in many of those cases, you don't need, like, a lot of JavaScript, and we tend to put a lot of responsibility in the front end lately, which is fine because also the browser has a lot of capabilities, but in many times that drops performance at the end user experience. So in those many cases where you don't need much JavaScript, I think these frameworks like Astro or 11T, they're doing an amazing job on, putting there an amazing DX experience, but keeping the best user experience as well, and combining both at the same time. And also, like you said, Lihao, maybe these philosophies are not, like, new, because we had frameworks there before. Like, for example, I don't know if you know Jekyll or Hugo, that they were very, very optimistic for this kind of Jamstack content-based sites. But it's true that probably the tooling around or the developer experience was not the best. So these modern frameworks that they keep DX and UX as it best, for a specific content or Jamstack websites, I think they are really cool. And I'm really looking forward for those to get more mature. What do you think, Chance?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. And it's an interesting time to be talking about all of this. I mean, it's a really exciting time to be talking about all of this. I think people like to joke that we just sort of run around in circles in web development. Like, we we go to one pattern, we love it, and then we decide we hate it, and then we go back to the old pattern, and then we love it, and we decide to hate it again. And it's just like, I think that's totally wrong, but I also see where it comes from. I think every time we go back, we take a step back, we take learnings from the years past. And so like it's like a circle, but it's more like a spiral, right? Like we're spiraling in towards like some consensus eventually. Or maybe that's at least what we're aiming for, right? And as long as we keep aiming for that, we're going to find incremental improvement along the way. And I think that it's a really exciting time for this kind of development, because for at least a while there, from my perspective, I feel like we all got, like when React came out, I think one of the revolutionary things with React was just this idea of like reactivity and stateful reactivity and everything being a function of your state. And it totally turned a lot of existing accepted paradigms on its head. And it was really exciting. And a lot of us really gravitated towards that and went in on React. And unfortunately, I think as a result of that, we got a little stagnant in that time. And also keep in mind at the time, like when React first came out, the web platform was very different than it is today. It's kind of remarkable how much the web itself has changed in the past 6 years, 7 years, and how many new APIs that we have that we didn't have before. I mean, Webpack was really popular for very good reasons, because we wanted to use all the new fancy shiny JavaScript before we really could. I mean, before that, we had Babel that plugs into that actually handles a lot of those transformations. But Webpack also empowered us to like make our own rules in JavaScript and import CSS files and image files and do all these things that made component-driven development really exciting. But it also, going back to the whole magic discussion, Webpack is very magical. And so like, it's not that that's necessarily bad, but the trade-off is if you don't know what's going on under the hood, then it can make things a little bit trickier to debug. And I really do love this back to basics approach. It's like we've recognized the advancement of the web platform, and as a community have all sort of decided like it's worth investing in that, and it's worth leaning into that. And maybe we shouldn't do as much of this compiler magic, unless you're Svelte. Maybe we shouldn't do as much of this compiler magic. And that's no shade on Svelte, by the way. You have to have compiler magic if you're going to invent your own syntax and stuff. And we've already talked about those trade-offs. But from the JavaScript perspective, when we're writing JavaScript, it's nice to know that what we're writing is much closer to what you see in the browser or in Node. And for me, it's like it makes development more fun, honestly, to me. I don't like spending as much time debugging Webpack output. I'd much rather just build cool products. And yeah, ESBuild, Vite, all these really cool tools based around ES modules and modern JavaScript have just made it a lot more fun to build, in my opinion. So I don't know, exciting time and a lot of innovation too. I think the most exciting thing for me is that we don't actually know what this is going to pan out to look like. And we're all poking at it and trying to figure out what we think makes sense. And this is how we move closer to better tooling and better apps.
Exactly. That's it is really exciting time to be part of web development right now, because everything under the hood is just all craziness. Sweet. I think that's all we have time for, everybody. I want to thank all of our speakers. Thank you so much for joining us today. And of course, all of you asking questions and watching. We highly appreciate it.
Thank you all for having us.
Yeah. Yep.